Amanda is a 4th of July when it came to personalities. When you think of 4th of July, you think of sun, having fun. Amanda has a warmth about her.
And that is Amanda Pardue, age 35. And the reason why she's wearing scrubs is because she's working at the Hamilton Female Clinic.
She was the receptionist, and she absolutely loved it.
She loves helping people because that's how Amanda was. Amanda was like a ball of sunshine. And she would make you feel like you were the best person in the world. She already had 2 children. She had a boy and a girl. She had already been divorced for a couple years before I met her.
The children ended up going to live with the grandparents, but her kids were doing great, and so she was still really happy and upbeat and optimistic about the future.
Amanda was a single female. She was a beautiful girl. So yes, she dated. At that time, it was a big rave to go on the internet to find somebody that you can connect with. So she was going on them sites. She hit left. And that's how she met Seth Peralt, through the internet.
Well, he was very handsome, kind of dashing, had a little bit of money so that they could do things and have fun.
He made her feel wonderful, beautiful. Before you knew it, she was in love. They were in love. We were like, slow the roll, slow down. But how can you tell somebody when they're in love to slow down? Seth had this beautiful home. The town was called Social Circle. It's here in Georgia. But Amanda was looking for love, not a home. It wouldn't have mattered if he lived in a mobile home or if he had that home. She was in love with him. They moved in together. A little bit fast, but wonderful.
Well, I was so happy for her, very happy.
I went and visited Amanda to check out this guy because I want to know more about him. And I interrogate people. And I interrogated him. And that's how I found out a lot of things. Well, he couldn't tell me how he made his money because he didn't have a job. You got your beautiful home, you got your cars, you got your motorcycles without a job. How do you do that? Because I would like to know, because I want to do that. He didn't have no money. That it was all his father's money. That's how they were living. That's how they were eating.
I mean, who's almost 40 and has their parents paying for everything?
Six months after her and Seth had moved in together, knock, knock, you have a little girl. I get a phone call from Amanda, it's funny now, saying he's got a kid. And I'm thinking, where in the hell did this baby come from?
It was a surprise that Seth had a daughter. Her name was Bray.
Seth had this ex-girlfriend, and they ended up having a baby.
I know that Amanda was oddly cool about it. She's a better person than I am. I would have had questions.
She opened her arms and took that child in. Amanda fell in love with her. No qualms, no nothing. She took that child in, it was her own.
I open up my phone and I look on Facebook, and my best friend of 38 years just got married.
The only people who were at the wedding was Seth, Amanda, her daughter, her son, and Bray. That's it. It was almost like a secret hush-hush kind of thing. I said, you went off and got married without me? Oh, Vina, it was so rush, rush, rush. He wouldn't let me get my hair done. He wouldn't let me do this. He wouldn't allow me to do that. I said, what in the hell is going on? If you are so much in love with somebody, would you not give them the wedding? Would you not want her sisters there and her best friend and her to be so happy? That tells you it was a business. He wanted Amanda for a certain reason. I told her it was a very bad idea to stop working. You always have to have your own little money. But what I got from Amanda is that Seth wanted her home to be a housewife. That was his way of controlling her, financial control, by telling her how much she can spend, what she can spend. Why? He's got her life in his hands, and he knows it. One day, I got a phone call from Amanda saying that my husband's gonna join the police force. I said, what? You go from not having a job to becoming a police officer. And in Georgia, that is a lot of weight. You're a good old Southern boy that's a cop. But she was so proud that he did it. You have pictures of him getting his badge, and she's standing right next to him. They're all beaming with pride.
The idea of Seth becoming a police officer was mind-boggling to me. I think that he specifically chose being a police officer for his ego, so that he could have more control, even more than he already had. When Seth wants something, Seth gets it.
For him, that uniform meant I'm better than you, and now I can prove it. I am above the law, because I am the law.
I am a real estate broker. Amanda had reached out to me and asked me to help Seth's father with selling the house at Social Circle. So I had a friend at the time, and I said, let's make a road trip out of it. Let's go visit my friend Amanda. And Amanda was just so happy to see me. We walked through the house, and she's so proud of the decor. But all of a sudden, Seth walks in. And I look over at Amanda, and she's like ghost white. Her entire demeanor changed. Once we got into the car, my friend said, Carrie, something's really wrong. And she said, look, she said, the hairs on my arms are standing up. She said, Carrie, don't be surprised if he kills her. I was like, you are insane. I was so confused because Amanda had what she'd always wanted. She had the house, she had Bray to take care of, she's living her best life. I didn't want to hear what my friend was trying to articulate to me, that Amanda was in danger. I wasn't ready to hear it.
They had lake access, they have golf carts, very safe neighborhood. It's a perfect neighborhood to raise your family there. When they first moved in there, everything was hunky-dory. And the neighbors thought Seth was a nice gentleman. They felt a little bit more secure because he was a police officer. He was the law.
Life looked perfect. It was literally picture perfect to the outside world. Amanda always made it out to be that everything was fine. Everything's great. So I started feeling a little bit better, a little bit more comfortable until the text started coming. Amanda finally started bringing me in a little bit about some things that were going on with her. Seth would call her fat and would just demean her and call her really ugly names.
That's like the beginning. But them little things escalate. And before you know it, he's pushing you around, grabbing a hold of you. For him, it's like a power trip. They're trying to mentally break you down. They began to fight. So what Amanda did was went to the next door neighbor's bushes. She hid in their bushes so he wouldn't see her.
And Seth automatically assumed that she went to the neighbor's house. And he literally barges in the door of this neighbor, and he's going through their house, and they're just like in shock. And they're like, "What are you doing here?" "I'm looking for my wife. Where's she at? I know she's here." And they're like, no, she's not here. Get out of our house. We're gonna call the police. And he says, "I am the police." To me, that shows me that he's not a real police officer. He's more of a wolf in sheep's clothing. These were strangers. And if he could treat complete strangers like that, I thought, what must Amanda have been going through all alone? I stopped receiving phone calls. I stopped getting messages. All of that went away.
She'd be calling me through the iPad or Messenger, Facebook Messenger thing. Amanda did not have a cell phone. I believe the reason why she did not have a cell phone is that he could keep tabs on her all the time. Seth had completely controlled the money because Amanda didn't have any.
Amanda couldn't even buy feminine products. Her basic needs were not even being met.
We successfully got her to leave a couple times. She would leave and he'd be on the phone trying to get her back before she could get out of the driveway.
He finds her kryptonite, and her kryptonite is, if you don't come back, who knows what's gonna happen to Bray.
Seth would call, make that phone call, and she would go home. That little girl is what kept her in that house, because she considered that little girl her own child, and she was not going to leave her. My birthday's on June 6th, Amanda always would call me. I was getting a little confused because Amanda wasn't calling me for my birthday like she always does, and we Zoom. So I would physically see her. Well, she wouldn't Zoom me. She would just call me. And I said, no, I want to Zoom. I want to see your face. I want to see you. And she's like, no, 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 no. And I'm thinking to myself, something's not right. I had my phone in my hand. So I quickly hit that button for a Zoom to where we could be on camera. And I took that picture within seconds. Picture I took of Amanda, it scared me. So I took the picture, I don't know, so I could show her one day, so she could see it, you know? Like, this is what he does to you. You can see where her jaw is all swollen. And I asked her, what's going on here? Well, she told me really what happened. He turned around and jacked her right in the jaw. Just punched her like a man. He almost broke her jaw. That's how hard he hit her. Then another occurrence happened. These are the pictures that she took of herself. Looks like he punched her in the face. Her eyes all swollen. It just makes me angry. Just anger. After that picture was taken, life got a hell of a worse. Everything escalated.
Some days later, I get this really alarming, cryptic text from Amanda. Have a super jealous husband that records everything. He will see this message because our phones are synced and my house has cameras throughout. And then she says, monitored all day and night. You know, she's scared, she can't do anything without him seeing what she's doing. And then Amanda says, have a nice place, but living in a prison. Going to delete these messages. He may still see them, but keep them for me, please. Amanda was leaving breadcrumbs with me because she trusted that I would be able to communicate if something ever happened to her. I had the breadcrumbs. Why couldn't I put the pieces together? Was I not intuitive enough? I feel guilty that I could have done more or should have done more.
One night, I got a phone call from Amanda. This is probably, I don't know, probably 9:30, 10 o'clock. Saying that somebody was lurking around her house. She saw somebody walking. She didn't see who it was a shadow. She could tell that it was a man that walked by the window. It scared the crap out of her. I said, well, did you call 911? She goes, no, I called Seth, and Seth told me not to call the cops, that he's gonna take care of her when he gets home. He told Amanda, do not call the police, don't get them involved. The second time it happened, again, I thought, it's gotta be one of these hoodlums that are around the neighborhood trying to break into people's cars or something. And then the basement door, somebody was trying to get in it. She's got a child at home by herself. Somebody's wiggling the door. She's scared. She calls her husband. He tells her, calm down. I'll take care of it. That's when I knew something wasn't right. He's a cop. Somebody's trying to break into your house. Where's your security? Where's your lights? They only occurred when Seth was on night shift. It never occurred any time when Seth was actually home.
So we had the suspicion, all of this burglary nonsense was purely Seth playing games with Amanda, terrorizing her and just control over her and making her feel fear.
On January 28th of 2020, I got a Zoom call from Amanda. She was in the bedroom with Bree, and she was crying hysterically. I knew something was going on. She's Zooming me. So I'm getting an actual view of Amanda when it actually went down. Seth grabbed a hold of her and pulled her out of the house. You can hear Bree in the background. Mommy, are you okay? Mommy, are you okay? First thing come out of my mouth is hang the phone up, call 911.
Amanda finally gets help from someone outside. The neighbors provided Amanda with a safe place, and police are called.
Thank you for holding. How may I help you?
Yes, can you please send the officer out to Long Island Drive?
What is your name?
Amanda Perrault.
Okay, and what's going on today?
It's my husband. He's putting his hands on me.
Who is?
My husband. He works for Eatonton Police Department.
What's his name?
Michael Seth Perrault.
Has he threatened you with his weapon or anything?
No, he hasn't, but he has put his hands on me. He's like putting his finger in my face and pushing me against the wall and putting his hands on my neck.
Okay. We'll get somebody out there, okay?
Seth Perrault's wife reported that she'd been assaulted by Seth. The deputies responded. She had some reddish marks around her neck area, chest area, right in here. He basically battered her in that way and thrown her out of the home. They, in turn, talked to the daughter. She ran and hid in the closet while this happened. That wasn't the first time she hid in the closet, that she tried to intervene to help Amanda.
And how do you say your name?
Bray.
Bray?
R-A.
What did you do when they started fighting?
I was kind of just there trying to protect Miss Amanda because Daddy could take on his own self. I went to go in my bedroom because my dad said so, and then I heard Miss Amanda screaming, and I thought she was like getting hurt, so I ran in there, and I think Daddy may have kicked her. I'm not really sure. And then all of a sudden, Daddy just started grabbing her arms, and then she was trying to get around him, and then Daddy just pushed her over the laundry table.
And Bray says, you know, my daddy hit my mommy and pushed her out the door.
What did you think when you saw that?
I was mad at my daddy. I don't understand why Daddy would do such a thing.
The cops put him in handcuffs and take him out of the house.
As they were getting ready to put him in the patrol car and take him to jail, he said to her, I got you now.
And Amanda's telling me they're taking him to jail, they're taking him to jail. The first thing that came out of my mouth was like, pack your and get out of that house. You don't get it. He's going to lose his job over this. He's going to kill you, Amanda. The next day, she goes to the court.
The judge considered that Seth had to stay away from his wife as a condition of bond while this matter was pending. But Amanda actually said that she did not want that to occur. Now, she was distraught, I could tell. The judge was very adamant, asking her, was she sure she didn't want a stay-away order in place? And she answered that she was sure. Her response was, well, he doesn't have anywhere else to go.
Of course he had somewhere to go. He has family. He had plenty of places to go. He's sitting in that jail cell. His world is crumbling around him. And Seth used Amanda's love for Bray. Amanda's worst fear was, would he hurt Bray? He verbalizes that to Amanda. I can only imagine that she felt defeated. So that was Amanda's attempt at trying to show Seth, I can fix this. I can fix it. And Amanda knows a restraining order won't stop Seth.
And Amanda went to that judge and told that judge he can come home. And I was sick to my stomach. When she did that, that judge signed her death warrant. In his eyes, Amanda had ruined his life. And that was it.
Not only was Seth getting ready to lose his job as a police officer, he was looking at losing custody of his child too.
He sat there in that house with her for 6 days. I remember being on the phone calls with her. I'm talking to her, saying, "Are you okay, Amanda? How is the situation? How is he acting?" And he was acting so nice. It was disgusting. I was like, "You need to get out of that house, Amanda. You need to get out of that house."
That day in February, I pulled up to Long Island Drive with my subpoena for Mr. Peralt. When I got to his place, he had one of those video doorbells, and I pushed the button and waited. And I heard heavy footfalls inside the house, and I assumed that it was somebody running to the door. The footfalls moved from one side of the house, kind of toward the front door, but not to the front door. And the footfalls retreated. I rang the doorbell again. I was there for about 7 minutes. It's like, come on, man, just answer the door. The man would have known what it was. And finally, I gave up. So I drive away from the Peralt's house, and I go on about my patrolling. I make it 3 or 4 or 5 miles away, and I get a call from my shift supervisor requiring me to return to the Peralt house because of a reported incident. I go quickly. Seth Peralt comes out the front door of the house. He was holding his cell phone, and he was blubbering. He was inconsolable. He said that Amanda was dead.
I get a personal call from the chief of police. He's got Seth Peralt on the phone, and Seth has told him that his wife had committed suicide. We drove as fast as we could, with lights and sirens on. I arrive on the scene. Seth was sitting on the steps holding his hands over his eyes. I walked in the house, and I entered the bedroom. and I saw the body of the deceased. It was Amanda Peralt. And I could see a gunshot wound to her head. This is Amanda's body. And the first thing you see in the bottom right-hand corner there below her feet is the pistol itself. You see her body with her legs together. She's flat on her back. Her arms are pulled completely against her side. And on her right side, maybe 4 or 5 inches from her right hand, is the magazine to the pistol. Well, you know, I'm a graduate of the FBI National Academy, and I've got a college degree. But you know what? Anybody could tell that scene wasn't right.
The sheriff had asked Peralt if he would ride with me to the sheriff's office. He was not under arrest. I realized just how clean he was. The man had no blood on him. Law enforcement officers are trained first responders. The first responders try to stop the blood from coming out. You don't walk away from scenes like that clean. He just kept talking and blubbering. He reiterated that his wife had committed suicide. But when we got closer to the sheriff's office, he begged me to pull the car over and shoot him in the head. It was unsettling. It made the little short hairs come up on your neck because it wasn't right. Perhaps his wife hadn't killed herself.
And so we went back to my office and interviewed him about what had occurred that day.
Sheriff, I've lost everything. I know how this goes. You know, I'm a police officer. You know, I know how this goes. Can I talk to you off the record and talk to you like plainly?
Well, we're talking pretty plain, aren't we?
Okay. Yes, sir. I lost my wife, and I promise you, I'll look you in your face as a law enforcement officer. I did not do anything. I had nothing to do with it. My wife looked at me and executed herself.
Of all the times I've ever questioned anybody, I've never heard anyone use the term executed.
She looked at me and said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I put you through this. Boom. I saw my wife execute herself.
That's an unusual term to use when making reference to a suicide.
Like, listen, your deputies arrested me, okay?
This is not about the other day. This is about your wife being dead today.
My whole name got destroyed. Every time she'd go click on Facebook, she'd be like, there it is.
The only thing he wanted to tell me was that my deputies shouldn't have arrested him on January the 28th, and what a great police officer he was.
I take pride in being a good law enforcement agent. I hope you know that. And the fact of the matter is, I'm a good police officer.
You want to talk about your arrest, you want to talk about all of that. I want to talk about your wife.
And I'm willing to talk to you about it.
Let me say, have you had anything to drink today?
It was a very bizarre interview. It really was.
I kept on getting a Facebook phone call. And I'm thinking, who in the hell is calling my phone at 10 o'clock at night through Facebook? And it was Amanda's cousin. And first thing he said, did you speak to Amanda today? I knew it. I said, he killed her. He killed her. And that's how I found out my best friend died.
Well, I knew he was guilty, but what I wanted was more evidence before I actually made an arrest. So I'd let him go that day.
We already knew that he killed her. We knew it wasn't a suicide. And knowing that he was let go and back out on the streets was devastating.
And then I lived a nightmare from that day on. A living, walking nightmare.
I went back out to the scene. I laid down on the bed myself to show the district attorney the position the body had been in. You mean to tell me that she shot herself and then she laid supine, pulled her legs together, completely together, pulled her arms against the body, took the magazine out of the gun after she shot herself? Dead people don't remove magazines out of guns. You know, it was just evidence of guilt, in my opinion. I decided to obtain an arrest warrant and go arrest him. When I went to his sister's home where I knew he was staying, when I pulled up in the yard to get out of the car, he's sitting on the porch talking to his attorney. During the trial, I testified in court.
It was absolutely obvious to me that Amanda Peralta could not have shot herself, and somebody absolutely had to have taken the magazine from that pistol, moved that pistol to the location it was, and had to have moved that body.
Throughout the trial, at any time I looked at him, I never saw Seth express any remorse or anything of that. He was pretty much stoic and often looked at the table itself, not even in the direction of the witnesses or anything. One of the most damaging pieces of evidence against Seth was when his daughter said that Amanda had told her that if Seth lost custody of Bray because of that arrest, that Seth was going to shoot her dead, is what the child said. Well, he was convicted of murder, and when the jury returned the guilty verdict, the Judge Trammell, our Chief Superior Court judge, promptly sentenced him to life without parole. Well, it goes to show you that you don't know what's going on behind those closed doors. The facade of what you see on the outside is not indicative of what's going on the inside. Very sad situation.
Right now, what's important is that Amanda's story is out, but it hurts a lot. It's tremendous amount of guilt and pain and sadness.
She was my life. So yeah, I'll go to my grave thinking I should have done something. I should have just got in my car, got on the damn plane, and just pulled her out of that house. But I didn't. I gotta look up to the sky to talk to my best friend because I did not take the initiative. So yeah, go find out what's going on. Do something. Just do something.
I do take solace in that I kept the messages. When I spoke with my friend, she said, "You will always have my back, and I love you so much for that. My thoughts and prayers are with you in these days, months, in years ahead. That was Amanda.
Under the cold January sky, Grant Hill looked almost peaceful. The streets were empty except for the occasional sweep of headlights gliding across damp asphalt. Porch lights glowed behind drawn curtains. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once before the neighborhood settled back into silence. It was the kind of ordinary night that thousands of people would forget by sunrise. But some nights refuse to disappear. Some nights leave behind questions that echo louder than the gunshots that created them. Just after 26 minutes past midnight, on January 19, 2026, someone dialed emergency services. The caller's voice carried urgency, but very little explanation. 2 people were lying in the street. There was blood. They weren't moving. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights painted the quiet neighborhood in violent colors. Police officers rushed toward 2 motionless bodies lying on the pavement. Paramedics dropped to their knees without hesitation, working against time with practiced precision. Hands pressed desperately against chests that no longer responded. Voices called out instructions that dissolved into the cold air. Nothing worked. The man was 31-year-old Ruben Chavez. The woman beside him was 28-year-old Evelyn Virgin. They had been shot multiple times. Their lives ended together in the middle of a residential street, where neighbors had expected nothing more dramatic than another peaceful California night. But perhaps the most haunting discovery wasn't the bodies themselves. It was what investigators found only a few feet away. Parked nearby was a vehicle. Inside that vehicle sat 3 children. All under the age of 2. Still strapped safely into their car seats. Still alive. Too young to understand why strangers with flashing lights surrounded the car. Too young to recognize that the voices calling through the windows belonged to police officers instead of their parents. Too young to know that the 2 people who had kissed them goodnight only moments earlier would never hold them again. The children had survived. Their parents had not. For seasoned homicide detectives, violent crime was an unfortunate reality of the profession. They had witnessed scenes stained by anger, greed, revenge, addiction, and desperation. They knew that bullets rarely struck without a story behind them. Yet this scene carried a different weight. Because somewhere between those lifeless bodies and those untouched children lay a decision. Someone had chosen this place. Someone had chosen this moment. Someone had pulled a trigger while knowing innocent children were only yards away. That realization transformed the investigation from a tragic homicide into something even darker. It forced detectives to ask not only who committed the crime, but why anyone would risk leaving 3 babies orphaned in a matter of seconds. At first glance, it looked like another domestic dispute turned deadly. Those cases were painfully common. Relationships ended. Arguments escalated. Threats became violence. Families shattered. But as investigators began peeling back the layers surrounding Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin, the picture became increasingly complicated. This wasn't simply a love triangle. It wasn't merely jealousy. It wasn't one explosive argument between former lovers. Instead, detectives uncovered months of resentment, bitter custody disputes, fractured families, and emotional wounds that had never been allowed to heal. The past had refused to stay buried. And eventually, someone appeared determined to erase it permanently. The names at the center of the investigation would soon dominate local headlines. Ramses Rex Morales. Princess Perez. One was the new boyfriend. The other was the former partner. Between them stood years of emotional baggage that stretched far beyond romance. Children. Court hearings. Custody arrangements. Broken trust. Lingering anger. Each piece seemed insignificant on its own. Together, they formed a fuse that investigators believed had been burning long before anyone realized smoke was filling the room. But every homicide investigation begins in the same place. Not with suspects. Not with arrests. Not even with evidence. It begins with human lives. Because before Ruben Chavez became another name inside a police report, he was someone's son. Someone's father. Someone's friend. Before Evelyn Virgin became another victim counted in crime statistics, she was a young mother building a future that disappeared in seconds. Their stories did not begin on a dark street surrounded by police tape. They began years earlier with hopes that looked remarkably ordinary. Families. Children. Second chances. A belief that tomorrow could always be better than yesterday. Like so many people trying to rebuild after failed relationships, they carried emotional scars while attempting to create something new. Few could have imagined how quickly that fragile hope would collapse. Grant Hill itself offered no warning. The neighborhood, perched just east of downtown San Diego, blended older homes with newer families searching for stability. During daylight hours, children rode bicycles through quiet streets while neighbors exchanged greetings from front porches. It wasn't immune to crime, but it wasn't the sort of place residents associated with executions in the middle of the night. The contrast made the scene even more unsettling. Violence always feels louder when it invades places built around ordinary lives. The investigators, who arrived that morning, understood another uncomfortable truth. Murders committed between people who know each other are often the most emotionally complex. Unlike random attacks, these cases rarely emerge from nowhere. They grow slowly. An argument here. A threat there. A court hearing. An unanswered message. A new relationship. An old resentment. Each moment appears manageable in isolation. Together, they can become something impossible to control. Friends and relatives would later describe tensions that had lingered for months. Disagreements over children. Conflicts involving former partners. Emotions intensified by new romantic relationships. None of these circumstances automatically lead to murder. Millions of separated parents navigate painful custody battles every year without violence. Millions of former couples learn to coexist despite resentment. But sometimes the combination of wounded pride, perceived betrayal, and unresolved anger creates a dangerous environment where rational thinking slowly disappears. By the time detectives started interviewing witnesses, they weren't simply reconstructing a shooting. They were reconstructing years of emotional history. Every conversation became another piece of a complicated puzzle. Every phone call. Every text message. Every court filing. Every disagreement. Somewhere inside those countless interactions lay the moment when frustration transformed into something irreversible. Yet perhaps the most chilling aspect of this case was how quickly events unfolded after the shooting itself. While emergency crews fought unsuccessfully to save Ruben and Evelyn, investigators were already receiving information suggesting the suspects had not vanished into the night. Instead, they were moving fast. The hours immediately following a homicide often determine whether justice comes quickly or remains elusive for years. Evidence grows colder. Witness memories begin fading. Vehicles disappear. Phones are discarded. State lines become invisible barriers. Every minute matters. In this investigation, time became the detective's greatest ally. Less than half a day after Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin were killed, law enforcement officers hundreds of miles from the emotional center of the crime found themselves stopping two individuals whose journey would become one of the investigation's defining moments. The border. A place crossed by thousands every day. A place representing both escape and return. A place where one chapter of the investigation would close, allowing another to begin. But arrests alone never answer the most important question. Why? Why would two parents lose their lives within moments of each other? Why would children be left sitting silently inside a nearby vehicle while bullets shattered their future? Why would a custody dispute, something designed by the legal system to protect families, become connected to allegations of calculated murder? Those answers would prove far more complicated than detectives initially imagined. Because every participant carried their own version of events. Every relationship possessed hidden fractures invisible to outsiders. Every decision leading to that January night was influenced by emotions that had accumulated over months, perhaps years. As prosecutors prepared charges, defense attorneys prepared responses. Not guilty. Two words capable of reshaping every assumption. Two words ensuring that the search for truth would extend far beyond the crime scene itself. The legal battle had only begun. The emotional battle had started long before the first shot was fired. This is not merely the story of a double homicide. It is the story of intertwined families, fragile trust, and children who became the silent witnesses to a tragedy they were far too young to understand. It is the story of how unresolved conflict can quietly evolve until ordinary conversations become dangerous confrontations, and how decisions made in moments of anger can destroy generations. Most importantly, it is the story of Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin, not as names in headlines or evidence in a courtroom, but as two human beings whose final moments became the beginning of one of San Diego's most heartbreaking criminal investigations of 2026. Because before detectives searched for justice, before prosecutors filed charges, before the media followed every courtroom development, there was simply a cold January night. Two young parents. 3 surviving children. And a silence that would never again feel ordinary. The story of this case did not begin with flashing police lights, or the sound of gunfire echoing through the streets of Grant Hill. It began years earlier, inside ordinary homes where life looked remarkably familiar to countless American families. There were birthday candles balanced on grocery store cakes, children laughing in living rooms scattered with toys, hurried mornings before work, late-night conversations about bills, and quiet promises whispered between people who genuinely believed they would grow old together. Like many tragedies, there was no single moment when fate announced itself. Instead, it unfolded one small decision at a time. To understand what happened during those early hours of January 19, 2026, it is necessary to step away from the crime scene entirely and enter the lives of the people whose choices, hopes, disappointments, and conflicts gradually became intertwined. Grant Hill, located just southeast of downtown San Diego, is a neighborhood of contrasts. Old craftsman houses stand beside newly renovated homes. Narrow residential streets weave through gentle hills overlooking parts of the city skyline. During daylight, children walk to nearby schools while parents hurry toward jobs scattered across San Diego County. Neighbors recognize one another by first name. Elderly couples water their front gardens in the evenings. Delivery trucks come and go with little notice. It is the kind of neighborhood where routines become comforting. Morning sunlight spills across porches. Dogs bark behind backyard fences. Families grill dinner on weekends. Most nights end quietly. For the people living there, violence belongs somewhere else. That illusion would eventually shatter. Among those trying to build a future in Southern California was Ruben Chavez. At 31 years old, Ruben had already experienced both the joy and complexity that often accompany adulthood. Friends described him as someone who cared deeply about family, particularly his children. Fatherhood was not simply a title to him, it was an identity that shaped much of his daily life. Life, however, had not followed the path he once imagined. His romantic relationship with Princess Perez had ended. Relationships rarely collapse because of one argument alone. More often, they erode slowly beneath layers of disappointment, misunderstandings, financial pressure, incompatible expectations, and emotional exhaustion. While outsiders rarely witness those private moments, they often see only the aftermath. For Ruben and Princess, the aftermath was complicated. They shared children. That single fact guaranteed their lives would remain connected long after their romantic relationship had ended. For separated parents, every decision carries additional weight. Where will the children live? Who picks them up from school? Who pays for medical expenses? How are birthdays divided? What happens during holidays? Questions that appear straightforward on paper become emotionally charged when trust has already been damaged. According to investigators and later court records, Ruben sought greater involvement in the lives of his children. Earlier arrangements reportedly limited his contact through supervised visitation, something that can be emotionally painful for any parent regardless of the legal reasons surrounding such arrangements. Whether those limitations felt justified or unfair depended upon whom one asked. But emotions are rarely governed by legal documents. To a parent hoping for more time with their children, every missed birthday, every holiday spent apart, every school event observed from a distance can become another reminder of what has been lost. Custody battles possess a unique emotional intensity because they rarely concern possessions. They concern people. Children become the center of competing visions of love, responsibility, and protection. Every court hearing can feel less like a legal proceeding and more like a judgment of one's worth as a parent. Those emotional stakes would eventually become impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, life continued moving forward. Ruben eventually entered a new relationship with Evelyn Virgin. For many couples beginning again after heartbreak, new love carries a cautious optimism. Both people understand what failure feels like. Both carry invisible scars. Yet both choose to believe happiness remains possible. Friends would later remember moments suggesting Ruben and Evelyn were building exactly that kind of future. Not a perfect one. Simply a hopeful one. They spent time together. Raised children together. Shared responsibilities. Like countless young couples balancing work and family, much of their happiness likely existed within ordinary moments invisible to everyone else. Morning coffee before work. Late-night conversations after children finally fell asleep. Trips to grocery stores. Family photographs. Plans for birthdays. Dreams that never seemed extraordinary because they belonged entirely to them. Evelyn herself was only 28 years old. She was a mother first and foremost. Anyone who has cared for multiple young children understands the relentless rhythm of those early years. Sleep becomes fragmented. Schedules revolve around feeding times. Every outing requires preparation. Diaper bags. Blankets. Extra clothes. Snacks. Car seats. Parents quickly learn that leaving the house for 15 minutes often requires an hour of preparation. Yet within that exhaustion exists extraordinary love. The smallest smiles become unforgettable. First words become celebrations. Tiny hands reaching upward erase hours of fatigue. For Evelyn, motherhood defined much of everyday life. She cared for children still so young that they depended upon adults for absolutely everything. Every meal, every bath, every comforting embrace after nightmares. No parent imagines those responsibilities ending because of violence. Across town, another relationship was also taking shape. After separating from Ruben, Princess Perez began seeing Ramses Morales. Morales was younger. Only 21 years old. Youth alone never predicts violence, nor does entering a relationship with someone who has children from a previous partnership. Thousands of blended families successfully navigate those realities every year. Yet blending families also introduces new emotional dynamics. A new partner may witness ongoing disagreements with an ex-spouse. They may become protective, frustrated, resentful. Sometimes they inherit conflicts they never personally created. Investigators would later examine whether precisely that process occurred here. As months passed, the relationships between these four individuals became increasingly interconnected. Ruben and Evelyn, Princess and Ramses, former partners, new partners, children connecting every household. Every disagreement carried consequences extending beyond two people. Communication likely became unavoidable. Custody exchanges, scheduling, legal proceedings, unexpected encounters. Each interaction possessed the potential either to reduce tensions or deepen them. Unfortunately, according to prosecutors, tensions only continued growing. People often imagine violent crimes emerging from explosive tempers visible to everyone nearby. Reality is usually quieter. Resentment accumulates silently. Someone replays old arguments while driving home. Someone rereads text messages late at night. Someone interprets a routine court decision as a personal attack. Someone becomes convinced that another person is intentionally ruining their happiness. The outside world notices none of it. Neighbors continue mowing lawns. Co-workers discuss weekend plans. Children play together without understanding the emotional storms surrounding the adults raising them. Conflict develops privately. By the time others recognize danger, months of emotional escalation may already have occurred. According to investigators, disputes surrounding custody became one of the defining pressures affecting everyone involved. Custody battles are rarely confined to courtrooms. They follow parents home. Every legal filing generates conversations. Every hearing creates anticipation. Every ruling leaves someone disappointed. Financial stress often accompanies those proceedings. Lawyers require payment. Time away from work reduces income. Emotional exhaustion affects employment, friendships, and mental health. For some families, the legal process eventually creates stability. For others, it becomes another battlefield. While official records provide certain factual milestones, they cannot fully capture the emotional atmosphere surrounding those months. No document records silent tears after difficult phone calls. No transcript reveals anxious pacing inside living rooms before court appearances. No legal motion describes children asking innocent questions that adults struggle to answer. Real life unfolds between official paperwork. That unseen emotional landscape became critically important. Because prosecutors would eventually argue that the murders did not result from a sudden, spontaneous argument. Instead, they suggested the violence emerged from ongoing hostility that had been building long before January arrived. Whether every allegation ultimately withstands judicial scrutiny remains for the courts to determine. But investigators clearly believed the roots stretched backward through months of deteriorating relationships. Winter arrived in San Diego almost unnoticed. Unlike regions buried beneath snow, Southern California winters remain relatively mild. Cool evenings replace summer heat. Morning air carries a sharper edge. Sunsets arrive earlier. Life continues outdoors. Families still visit parks. Restaurants remain busy. Children still laugh on playgrounds beneath palm trees. Nothing about January 2026 suggested history was preparing to record another tragedy. If Ruben woke each morning thinking about spending more time with his children, no one outside his closest circle truly knew the depth of those hopes. If Evelyn worried about balancing motherhood with everyday responsibilities, those concerns remained ordinary. If Princess carried frustration over ongoing disputes, she likely shared those feelings only with trusted people. If Ramses felt protective, angry, or resentful, those emotions existed largely beyond public view. That is often the frightening reality of interpersonal violence. The warning signs rarely appear dramatic enough for strangers to recognize. The people closest to the conflict become accustomed to tension. Arguments become routine. Stress becomes normal. Raised voices no longer surprise anyone. Life continues despite emotional fractures growing wider beneath the surface. Then comes the moment when ordinary tension crosses an invisible line. No alarm sounds. No flashing warning appears. Only afterward do people look backward, connecting isolated events into a pattern that suddenly seems obvious. Detectives would later perform exactly that exercise. Every conversation became relevant. Every disagreement acquired new significance. Every previous encounter was reconsidered through the lens of homicide. What once appeared to be ordinary relationship conflict now demanded far closer examination. Could someone have predicted where this was heading? Did anyone hear threats that seemed insignificant at the time? Were there moments when intervention might have altered the future? Those questions haunt nearly every domestic homicide investigation. Sometimes there are answers. Often there are only regrets. As January 18th turned into January 19th, the four adults at the center of this story carried with them years of shared history. Some memories brought happiness. Others brought resentment. All of them would soon collide in ways that forever changed 9 children's lives. The streets of Grant Hill remained quiet. Most residents prepared for another ordinary Monday. Parents tucked children into bed. Televisions flickered behind closed curtains. Cars disappeared into garages. No one looking out across the neighborhood shortly before midnight could have imagined that within minutes, 2 young parents would lose their lives, 3 children would be left sitting alone in the darkness, and one of San Diego's most heartbreaking criminal investigations of 2026 would quietly begin. Every homicide investigation eventually reaches a point where detectives stop asking how someone died and begin asking who that person truly was. Crime scene photographs reveal wounds. Autopsy reports document injuries. Evidence bags preserve fragments of physical truth. But none of those things explain a laugh that made children smile, a habit of calling family members just to check in, or the quiet sacrifices that never appear inside official records. To understand the weight of what happened on January 19, 2026, it is necessary to meet Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin not as victims, but as people whose lives were still unfolding. Because long before police tape surrounded their final moments, they had spent years building lives centered around something far more ordinary than violence. They were parents. And for both of them, nearly every decision began and ended with their children. Ruben Chavez was 31 years old. He stood at an age where many people begin measuring life differently. Youth no longer feels endless, yet the future still seems filled with possibilities. Dreams become less about adventure and more about stability. the definition of success quietly changes. Instead of asking, "What do I want from life?" the question becomes, "What kind of life can I build for the people who depend on me?" For Reuben, that responsibility was impossible to ignore. Fatherhood shaped nearly every part of his identity. People who knew him remembered a man whose life revolved around family responsibilities, even when those responsibilities became emotionally exhausting. Like many separated parents, his relationship with his children was influenced not only by love, but also by legal arrangements, schedules, and court decisions that often left little room for spontaneity. There is a unique sadness that accompanies limited time with one's children. Parents measure life through ordinary milestones. The first day of school. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. A scraped knee that needs comforting. A bedtime story that ends with a child falling asleep halfway through the final page. When custody arrangements restrict those moments, every missed opportunity can feel permanent. Court documents may simply record visitation schedules. Parents experience them as lost memories. According to publicly available information surrounding the case, Reuben had been pursuing greater involvement in the lives of his children. That pursuit was more than a legal objective. It represented hope. Hope that tomorrow might offer another chance. Hope that relationships damaged by the past could slowly be repaired. Hope that one day the children would know their father not through scheduled visits, but through everyday life. Whether those hopes would ultimately have been realized is something no one can answer. The opportunity disappeared forever before the legal process could fully unfold. Outside the courtroom, Reuben was attempting to move forward emotionally as well. His relationship with Evelyn Virgin represented another beginning. Second chances often carry a quiet kind of courage. After disappointment, opening one's heart again requires trust. It requires believing that happiness remains possible despite previous heartbreak. Friends later described the couple as trying to build exactly that kind of future. Not an extravagant one. Simply a stable home filled with love and children. Theirs was the sort of relationship that rarely attracts public attention. There were no celebrity headlines. No extravagant vacations filling social media. Instead, there were grocery runs, family outings, long evenings caring for young children. The countless invisible responsibilities that define adulthood far more accurately than dramatic milestones ever could. Evelyn Virgin was 28 years old. Still remarkably young. Yet anyone watching her daily life would likely have noticed something that often accompanies devoted parents. She was constantly busy. Children under the age of 2 demand nearly continuous attention. Someone always needs feeding. Someone needs changing. Someone wakes unexpectedly in the middle of the night. Someone cries without being able to explain why. For parents raising multiple infants, or toddlers simultaneously, exhaustion becomes familiar. But so does purpose. The smallest achievements become enormous victories. A child sleeping through the night. First steps across the living room. Tiny voices learning new words. Parents rarely remember how tired they felt years later. They remember those moments instead. Evelyn's life revolved around creating those moments. Photographs shared among family members reportedly showed ordinary scenes that now carry heartbreaking significance. Children smiling. Adults leaning together. Birthday celebrations. Holiday gatherings. Nothing extraordinary. That is precisely what makes them so painful to revisit. Violence steals ordinary futures. It interrupts plans so routine that no one thinks to treasure them while they still exist. The final family dinner. The last shared joke. The final photograph, where everyone appears unaware that life is about to change forever. By all accounts, Evelyn embraced motherhood with the same determination that countless young mothers demonstrate every day. She organized routines, protected her children, balanced endless responsibilities. The world outside may have viewed those tasks as ordinary. To the children depending upon her, they were everything. The three youngest children would eventually become known publicly because of where they were found after the shooting. Inside a nearby vehicle. Still alive. Still secured inside their car seats. That detail has understandably dominated media coverage. Yet before that unimaginable night, they were simply three small children traveling with the adults who loved them. Perhaps one had fallen asleep before the drive even began. Perhaps another held a favorite blanket. Perhaps someone had cried briefly before finally settling down. Parents become experts at interpreting those tiny moments. To outsiders, babies appear interchangeable. To mothers and fathers, each child possesses a completely distinct personality. One smiles constantly. Another observes quietly. One loves music. Another laughs whenever someone makes a funny face. Those differences form the emotional fabric of family life. They are also the details forever interrupted by homicide. When investigators later searched the vehicle, they did not simply discover surviving children. They discovered evidence of ordinary parenthood. Car seats carefully installed. Items necessary for caring for young children. Signs that two adults had expected to continue raising their family after that night. Nothing inside the vehicle suggested finality. Everything suggested tomorrow. Perhaps that is why the discovery affected even experienced investigators so deeply. Police officers learn to maintain emotional distance. They must. Without that separation, witnessing tragedy day after day would become psychologically unbearable. Yet some scenes penetrate even the strongest professional defenses. Three children sitting alone, only feet away from their murdered parents, represented exactly that kind of scene. One detective later remarked in another unrelated homicide investigation that children often become the invisible victims of violent crime. The statement applies with painful accuracy here. Although physically unharmed, their lives changed forever within seconds. The oldest among them was still too young to fully understand death. The youngest would grow up knowing their parents primarily through photographs and stories told by relatives. Memory itself became something stolen. Family members on both sides suddenly faced responsibilities they never expected. How do grandparents explain loss to toddlers? How do relatives preserve memories for children who are too young to remember the people they loved? How do families rebuild after violence transforms every holiday into a reminder of absence? Those questions have no easy answers. Beyond the three children found at the scene, relatives later revealed another heartbreaking reality. Together, Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin left behind a total of 9 children, through their various family relationships. 9 young lives touched directly by a single act of violence. 9 futures permanently altered. When homicide statistics appear in annual crime reports, numbers often hide human consequences. 2 victims. 2 suspects. Multiple charges. But behind every number exists a network of people. Parents burying children. Brothers losing sisters. Friends replaying final conversations. Children asking questions no adult wishes to answer. Those invisible circles of grief continue expanding long after media attention fades. Neighbors in Grant Hill also struggled to reconcile what had happened. People who had previously associated the neighborhood with everyday family life, suddenly found themselves walking past a location forever connected to tragedy. Flowers appeared. Candles flickered near the place where Reuben and Evelyn lost their lives. Residents who had never spoken directly with the victims nevertheless paused in silence. Perhaps because every parent recognized the horror. Every neighbor imagined hearing those gunshots. Every family pictured children waiting alone in the darkness. Empathy requires very little personal connection. Sometimes shared humanity is enough. As investigators continued piecing together the final hours of Reuben and Evelyn's lives, they encountered another challenge familiar to every homicide case. The victims could no longer speak for themselves. Everything detectives learned would come indirectly. Phone records, witness interviews, surveillance footage, text messages, family recollections. Each source revealed fragments. None provided complete certainty. Human beings are wonderfully complicated. No one can be fully summarized through police reports. Reuben was undoubtedly more than a father involved in custody proceedings. Evelyn was undoubtedly more than a mother caring for small children. They had favorite songs, private jokes, dreams for the future, fears they shared only with people closest to them. Those personal dimensions disappear first when tragedy becomes headline news. True justice requires remembering them. Not because doing so changes legal outcomes, but because refusing to reduce victims to evidence preserves the very humanity violence attempts to erase. As dawn approached on January 19, relatives began receiving phone calls that every family fears. Some were awakened by ringing phones before sunrise. Others learned through law enforcement officers standing solemnly at their doors. Disbelief arrived first. There must be some mistake. Perhaps the hospital identified the wrong people. Perhaps someone misunderstood. Hope often survives several minutes longer than reality. Then comes confirmation. Words no family ever forgets. Every life contains moments dividing time into before and after. For the families of Reuben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin, that division arrived before sunrise on a January morning. Everything afterward would be measured against the lives they had lost. Children would celebrate birthdays without hearing familiar voices. School graduations would include empty seats. Family photographs would always contain invisible absences. The future Reuben and Evelyn imagined had vanished. But somewhere beyond the overwhelming grief, detectives continued searching for answers. Because if the victims' stories explained what had been taken away, the next phase of the investigation would focus on something equally important. Who had decided to take it? And why had years of complicated relationships suddenly ended in bullets on a quiet residential street? Those questions would soon lead investigators toward two names that already existed within the victims' shared history. Names connected not by chance, but by months of emotional conflict, custody disputes, fractured relationships, and decisions that prosecutors would later argue had been building toward violence long before anyone heard the first gunshot on Grant Hill, January 18, 2026. Slipped into the night without announcing that it would soon become one of the darkest dates connected to the Grant Hill neighborhood. Hours earlier, families throughout San Diego had been finishing ordinary Sunday routines. Laundry folded onto beds. Children argued over bedtime. Restaurants served their last customers before closing. Freeways carried the familiar rhythm of weekend traffic slowly fading into the quieter pace of midnight. Nothing about the evening appeared extraordinary. The weather was cool by Southern California standards, the kind of January night that encouraged people to zip their jackets before stepping outside, but never felt truly bitter. Streetlights reflected softly against sections of pavement still carrying traces of evening moisture. Palm trees moved only slightly as a gentle breeze drifted through the neighborhood. Inside homes across Grant Hill, televisions flickered behind curtains. Some people had already fallen asleep. Others were scrolling through their phones before bed. Parents quietly checked on sleeping children one last time. Life continued exactly as it always had. Somewhere within that ordinary night, Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin were together. With them were 3 very young children. No publicly released evidence has revealed every detail of their movements during those final hours, and investigators have been careful not to speculate beyond what the evidence supports. Yet what is known paints the outline of a night that transformed from routine into irreversible violence within only a matter of moments. For Ruben and Evelyn, there was no indication that these would become the last hours of their lives. Like countless parents caring for small children, much of their attention was likely directed toward practical concerns. Keeping the children comfortable. Making sure everyone was safely secured inside the vehicle. Thinking about the next destination. Perhaps discussing plans for the following day. Parents of infants rarely enjoy uninterrupted conversations. Every few minutes, a child needs attention. A bottle must be adjusted. A blanket slips from tiny shoulders. Someone begins to fuss before quickly settling again. These simple interruptions become part of everyday life. No one imagines they are also becoming the final ordinary moments they will ever experience. As midnight approached, the streets grew quieter. Traffic became increasingly sparse. The neighborhoods surrounding Grant Hill settled into the deep silence that often arrives after 12 o'clock. The city itself remained awake. San Diego never truly sleeps. Emergency rooms continued treating patients. Police officers patrolled familiar routes. Night shift workers poured coffee before beginning long hours. Somewhere, airplanes crossed the dark sky toward distant destinations. Life continued. Until suddenly it didn't. At approximately 12:26 a.m. on January 19th, everything changed. Exactly what happened during those crucial seconds remains known primarily through physical evidence, witness statements, and the conclusions investigators later assembled. What is beyond dispute is the outcome. Gunfire erupted. Not once. Multiple shots. The sound shattered the stillness that had settled over Grant Hill only moments earlier. In neighborhoods built around families, gunfire carries differently. It echoes through narrow residential streets. Dogs begin barking. Lights switch on inside nearby homes. Curtains move slightly as frightened residents wonder whether what they heard was fireworks, a car backfiring, or something far more dangerous. Most people hesitate. They hope it was nothing serious. They tell themselves they probably imagined it. But reality has a way of making itself impossible to ignore. When the shooting ended, Ruben Chavez lay wounded. So did Evelyn Virgin. The violence had been swift, brutal, decisive. According to investigators, both had suffered multiple gunshot wounds. The attack left almost no opportunity for escape. No opportunity to protect one another. No opportunity to say goodbye. Moments earlier, they had been 2 parents caring for young children. Moments later, they were fighting for their lives in the middle of a quiet street. Nearby, inside the vehicle, the children remained strapped into their car seats. That detail remains among the most heartbreaking aspects of the entire case. Children that young cannot fully understand loud noises. A sudden series of gunshots would likely have startled them. Perhaps one began crying. Perhaps another remained asleep through the chaos. Perhaps the youngest simply looked around in confusion, unable to understand why familiar voices had suddenly disappeared. No official account can fully reconstruct those moments from the children's perspective. They were too young to describe what they experienced. In many ways, that silence is more haunting than any testimony could ever be. The adults responsible for protecting them had suddenly become victims themselves. Only minutes after the shooting, an emergency call reached dispatch. The caller reported seeing two individuals lying in the roadway. There was urgency. There was confusion. There was very little certainty, beyond the obvious fact that something terrible had happened. Dispatchers immediately relayed the information. Police units already patrolling nearby changed direction. Paramedics accelerated toward the address. Every second mattered. The first officers arrived to a scene unlike anything the peaceful residential street had witnessed before. Emergency lights washed over the pavement in alternating shades of blue and red. Officers quickly secured the immediate area while simultaneously searching for possible suspects. Their first priority, however, was preserving life. Paramedics rushed directly toward Ruben and Evelyn. Training takes over during those first critical moments. Pulse checks, airway assessment, chest compressions, attempts to control catastrophic bleeding. Communication remains calm even when the situation is anything but. Experienced emergency personnel understand that panic helps no one. Yet even professionals recognize when injuries are devastating. Every effort was made. Every available intervention was attempted. Despite those efforts, neither Ruben Chavez nor Evelyn Virgin could be saved. The street that had been silent only minutes earlier now carried an entirely different atmosphere. Police radios crackled constantly. Crime scene tape stretched across intersections. Additional investigators began arriving. Supervisors coordinated personnel. Photographers documented every visible detail before anything could be disturbed. Then came another discovery. An officer noticed the nearby vehicle. At first glance, it may have appeared simply connected to the victims. Then someone looked inside. 3 children. Still secured in their seats. Alive. The emotional impact of that discovery spread quickly among first responders. Police officers are trained to separate emotion from responsibility. That separation becomes especially difficult whenever children are involved. Officers immediately ensured the children's safety. Medical personnel examined them for injuries. Miraculously, none had been physically harmed. The contrast was almost impossible to comprehend. Only a short distance separated life from death. Bullets had ended 2 adult lives. Yet 3 children escaped without physical injury. Chance alone often determines outcomes during violent crimes. A slightly different angle. One unexpected movement. A few inches in another direction. The result might have been unimaginably worse. Investigators later confirmed the children were Evelyn Virgins. Because of their ages, they could provide no information about the attack itself. Instead, they became silent reminders of what had been taken from them. Child protective procedures began almost immediately. Relatives would later become involved. But during those first hours, ensuring the children's immediate safety remained paramount. Meanwhile, detectives started examining the crime scene with painstaking attention to detail. Every homicide scene tells a story. Not through words. Through evidence. Spent shell casings. Blood patterns. Vehicle positions. Footprints. Surveillance cameras. Cell phone data. Witness observations. Each piece contributes a sentence. Together they form a narrative investigators hope accurately reflects reality. Detectives carefully marked every piece of physical evidence. Measurements were recorded. Photographs captured the exact placement of every object. Nothing was considered insignificant. Because the smallest overlooked detail has solved countless homicide investigations throughout history. As forensic specialists worked, patrol officers began canvassing the surrounding neighborhood. Residents slowly emerged from their homes. Some still wearing pajamas beneath jackets hurriedly thrown over their shoulders. Others stood silently on front porches watching investigators move beneath bright portable lights. Questions filled the air. What happened? Who was shot? Is the suspect still nearby? No one possessed clear answers yet. Fear spreads quickly through close-knit neighborhoods. People instinctively worry whether violence has ended or whether danger remains close. Witness interviews began immediately. Some neighbors reported hearing several gunshots. Others recalled seeing vehicles leaving the area. A few remembered little beyond being awakened unexpectedly. Human memory during traumatic events is notoriously imperfect. Detectives understand this. Individual accounts often contain inconsistencies. One witness believes there were 4 shots. Another insists there were 6. Someone remembers a dark-colored vehicle. Another recalls only headlights disappearing into the distance. The challenge lies not in finding perfect testimony. It lies in identifying where independent accounts begin overlapping. Those shared details often prove most reliable. As sunrise slowly approached, the scale of the investigation expanded. The San Diego Police Department's homicide unit assumed responsibility. Experienced investigators began reviewing every available source of information. Victim backgrounds, family relationships, phone records, known associates, recent conflicts. One reality quickly became impossible to ignore. This did not appear to be a random act of violence. Nothing at the scene suggested robbery. There was no immediate indication that strangers had selected Ruben and Evelyn by chance. Instead, detectives increasingly believed the victims had been deliberately targeted. That realization immediately shifted the investigation. When victims appear specifically chosen, investigators naturally focus on relationships. Who knew them? Who had recently argued with them? Who possessed motive? Who possessed opportunity? The answers to those questions often exist long before physical evidence identifies a suspect. As detectives spoke with family members and acquaintances, familiar names surfaced repeatedly. Princess Perez, Ramses Morales. Former relationships, current relationships, custody disputes, long-standing tension. Individually, none of those elements proved guilt. Collectively, they established a direction investigators could not ignore. The emotional history connecting all 4 adults suddenly became central to understanding the shooting itself. While detectives worked through the early morning hours, another clock was quietly ticking. If the people responsible had fled immediately after the attack, every passing minute increased the distance between suspects and investigators. Vehicles can cross county lines surprisingly quickly. State borders even faster. International borders faster still. Time would become the investigation's greatest enemy. Or perhaps, as events would soon reveal, its greatest ally. Because while forensic teams continued documenting the final moments of Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin, law enforcement agencies elsewhere were already beginning to notice movements, that would soon transform this heartbreaking homicide into one of the fastest-moving double murder investigations San Diego had seen in recent years. The hunt for whoever had pulled the trigger had already begun. By the time the first light of dawn crept over San Diego, the crime scene in Grant Hill had already transformed from a place of desperate rescue attempts into one of methodical investigation. The flashing ambulance lights were gone. The frantic rhythm of CPR had been replaced by a quieter, almost clinical silence. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the residential street, gently moving with the cool morning breeze. Patrol cars remained stationed at both ends of the block, preventing traffic from disturbing what detectives now viewed as an enormous puzzle waiting to be assembled. Forensic investigators moved slowly. Nothing happened quickly anymore. Every step was deliberate. Every photograph mattered. Every inch of pavement had the potential to answer questions that no witness could. Experienced homicide detectives often describe crime scenes as conversations. The victim cannot speak. The suspect refuses to speak. So the physical evidence speaks instead. The challenge is learning how to listen. The first task involved documenting the exact positions of Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin. Long before either body could be removed, forensic photographers carefully recorded every angle imaginable. Wide photographs captured the relationship between the victims and the surrounding environment. Closer images documented injuries, clothing, personal belongings, and the smallest physical details that might later become significant in court. Measurements followed. Distances between shell casings. Distances between the victims. Distances between the nearby vehicle and the location where Ruben and Evelyn had fallen. Nothing was estimated. Everything was measured. Because months or even years later, attorneys might ask investigators to explain why they reached certain conclusions. Objective documentation would become their strongest answer. The shell casings scattered across the roadway immediately attracted attention. Each one represented a separate trigger pull. Each carried microscopic markings capable of linking it to a specific firearm, if that weapon was ever recovered. Crime scene technicians carefully marked every casing before placing them individually into evidence containers. Chain of custody began at that exact moment. Evidence loses value if investigators cannot prove exactly who handled it and when. Modern homicide investigations depend upon precision. Every fingerprint, every DNA sample, every trace of biological material, every fiber, every footprint, every fragment of glass. Each piece may appear insignificant in isolation. Together, they can reconstruct an entire sequence of events. As forensic specialists examined the immediate area, another team focused on the victim's vehicle. It sat only a short distance away. From outside, it looked painfully ordinary. The kind of family vehicle seen every day in parking lots outside grocery stores, schools, and playgrounds. Nothing about its appearance hinted at the horror surrounding it. Inside, however, investigators encountered one of the most emotionally difficult aspects of the case. 3 child safety seats. 3 very young children had occupied them only hours earlier. Although the children had already been removed and placed into protective care, their presence remained visible through everything left behind. Small blankets. Children's belongings. Everyday items that reflected normal family life. Investigators examined the vehicle carefully, documenting its condition before searching for evidence. They looked for bullet damage, blood spatter, fingerprints, possible DNA, any indication that shots had entered or struck the vehicle itself. Every finding would help reconstruct exactly where everyone had been positioned when violence erupted. At the same time, detectives knew something equally important. Children this young could not become witnesses in the traditional sense. They could not describe faces. They could not identify voices. They could not explain the sequence of events. The investigation would need to rely almost entirely upon physical evidence and adult testimony. That reality placed even greater importance on every forensic detail collected at the scene. Nearby homes quickly became another critical source of information. Modern neighborhoods contain something investigators from previous generations could only dream about. Security cameras, doorbell cameras, garage cameras, private surveillance systems. Each device silently records ordinary life every day. Cars arriving home, delivery drivers, neighbors walking dogs, children riding bicycles. Most recordings are never viewed. Until a violent crime suddenly turns routine footage into invaluable evidence. Detectives moved from house to house requesting access to surveillance systems. Some homeowners had already begun reviewing their recordings after waking to police activity. Others willingly surrendered digital files without hesitation. Investigators carefully noted camera angles and recording times. Even if a camera failed to capture the shooting itself, it might record vehicles arriving before the attack, or leaving immediately afterward. A single passing image could establish timelines far more accurately than human memory. Technology has quietly transformed homicide investigations. Where witnesses once depended solely upon recollection, detectives now compare statements against timestamps accurate to the second. Surveillance footage rarely becomes emotional. It simply records whatever passes before the lens. Meanwhile, another investigative team began examining digital evidence. Cell phones belonging to the victims became immediate priorities. Modern smartphones contain extraordinary amounts of information. Recent phone calls, text messages, location data, social media activity, photographs, calendar appointments, search histories. Each category offers investigators another glimpse into the final hours of a person's life. Digital forensic specialists carefully preserved the devices, ensuring that no information would be accidentally altered during examination. Even a deleted message can sometimes become critically important. At police headquarters, detectives established what investigators often call the victimology phase of the case. Contrary to what television dramas often suggest, experienced homicide investigators spend considerable time studying victims before aggressively pursuing suspects. The reasoning is straightforward. Understanding the victim frequently reveals the offender. Who had recently argued with Ruben Chavez? Who communicated regularly with him? Who possessed reasons to resent him? The same questions applied to Evelyn Virgin. Did either receive threats? Were there recent confrontations? Had anyone expressed escalating anger? Every answer helped narrow the investigation. As relatives arrived for interviews, detectives encountered overwhelming grief. Family members struggled to comprehend how an ordinary evening had ended in unimaginable loss. Shock often affects memory. People jump between emotions. One moment they recall happy family gatherings. The next they remember recent disagreements that suddenly appear significant. Detectives understand this emotional complexity. Their role requires compassion without sacrificing objectivity. Every statement must be documented carefully. Every timeline verified independently. Investigators learned more about Ruben's ongoing custody dispute. The legal conflict surrounding visitation had reportedly created continuing tension. Court proceedings involving children often become emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. While legal documents describe schedules and parental rights, real people experience frustration, disappointment, and fear. Detectives did not assume the custody dispute caused the murders, but they recognized it as a possible source of motive. Motive alone proves nothing. Thousands of parents endure bitter custody battles without committing crimes. Nevertheless, identifying potential motives provides investigators with direction. As interviews continued, two names surfaced repeatedly: Princess Perez, Ramses Rex Morales. Princess had previously been in a relationship with Ruben. Together they shared children. After their separation, she began a relationship with Ramses Morales. According to investigators, conflict involving these relationships had persisted over time. The existence of prior conflict did not establish criminal responsibility. However, experienced detectives understand another important principle. When victims die in targeted shootings, investigators first examine people already connected to them. Statistically, someone within the victim's existing circle often possesses critical information. Whether that person ultimately becomes a witness, a suspect, or neither depends entirely upon the evidence. Throughout the morning, detectives began reconstructing the victim's final known movements. Who had spoken with them? Where had they traveled? When were they last seen alive? Which phones communicated with theirs? Financial records. Cell tower connections. Vehicle sightings. The investigation expanded outward like ripples spreading across water. Every confirmed fact generated additional questions. One particularly important line of inquiry involved determining whether anyone had followed Ruben and Evelyn before the shooting. Targeted attacks frequently require surveillance. If investigators could establish that another vehicle traveled the same route, it might reveal planning rather than spontaneous violence. Video analysts started comparing recordings from multiple locations throughout the surrounding area. Street by street. Intersection by intersection. Piece by piece. Another detective focused on emergency communications. The anonymous 911 call reporting the victims became part of the investigation itself. Exactly when was it placed? How quickly after the shooting? What details did the caller provide? Could the caller have witnessed the attack? Or merely discovered its aftermath? Even frightened witnesses sometimes reveal important information unintentionally through the words they choose. Dispatch recordings would later be examined repeatedly. Back at the crime scene, sunlight now illuminated details hidden during the darkness. Investigators revisited sections of the roadway under natural light. Sometimes evidence overlooked overnight becomes visible after sunrise. Tiny fragments. Subtle impressions. Additional biological material. Nothing was rushed. Justice often depends upon patience exercised during these first critical hours. As media helicopters began circling overhead, news of the double homicide spread rapidly across San Diego. Television broadcasts interrupted regular programming. Online news outlets published breaking updates. Social media filled with speculation. Residents wanted answers. Who were the victims? Was the community still in danger? Had anyone been arrested? Law enforcement deliberately released only limited information. Protecting the integrity of the investigation remained paramount. Revealing too much too early risks, contaminating witness statements, and alerting potential suspects to investigative strategies. Behind closed doors, however, the investigation was accelerating. Cell phone analyses. Witness interviews. Surveillance footage. Relationship histories. Everything increasingly pointed detectives toward a small group of individuals already familiar to the victims. The picture remained incomplete. No arrest decisions would be based solely upon suspicion. Evidence would determine every step. Then another development dramatically altered the pace of the investigation. Information reached detectives suggesting that two individuals connected to the victims might no longer be in San Diego. Their movements after the shooting immediately attracted law enforcement attention. Investigators began coordinating with agencies beyond the city itself. Whenever suspects may travel significant distances, communication becomes essential. Local police, county investigators, state authorities, federal agencies. Each organization contributes different resources. Time suddenly became the most valuable resource of all. If those individuals continued moving, opportunities to locate them might disappear quickly. If investigators acted immediately, however, there remained a chance to prevent the case from becoming a prolonged interstate, or even international, manhunt. Phones rang continuously inside investigative offices. Information moved rapidly between agencies. Names were confirmed. Vehicle descriptions circulated. Possible travel routes were examined. The homicide investigation, that had begun on one quiet residential street, was expanding far beyond Grant Hill. Detectives no longer focused solely on understanding what had happened. Now they were racing to answer a different question. Where were the people they believed might hold the key to explaining why two young parents had died while three children waited silently only a few feet away? As the morning of January 19 unfolded, the investigation entered a new and far more urgent phase. The crime scene in Grant Hill continued to yield valuable evidence, but detectives understood a simple truth that exists in every homicide investigation. Evidence can wait. People cannot. If those responsible for the shooting were still moving, every passing minute increased the possibility that they would disappear beyond the immediate reach of local law enforcement. Inside the San Diego Police Department's homicide unit, the atmosphere changed noticeably. The quiet concentration that had characterized the first hours after the murders gave way to constant movement. Detectives walked quickly between offices carrying case folders. Phones rang without interruption. Computer screens displayed maps, surveillance images, timelines, and communication records. Large whiteboards slowly filled with names, arrows, and handwritten notes as investigators attempted to organize the growing volume of information. Although the investigation was still in its earliest stages, certain patterns had already begun to emerge. One fact stood above the rest. Everything appeared deeply personal. There was no indication that Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin had been selected randomly. Nothing suggested a robbery gone wrong. Their belongings remained with them. The location itself offered little opportunity for financial gain. Instead, detectives increasingly believed they were looking at an intentional attack directed at specific individuals. Whenever investigators believe a victim has been deliberately targeted, they begin asking one fundamental question. Who stood to gain? The answer is rarely simple. Gain does not always mean money. Sometimes it means revenge. Sometimes humiliation. Sometimes anger. Sometimes the belief that another person has become an obstacle that must be removed. Those emotional motives often prove far more difficult to measure than financial ones. As investigators reconstructed Ruben's recent months, the ongoing custody dispute became impossible to ignore. Court records, family interviews, and prior interactions painted a picture of continuing conflict surrounding parental responsibilities. Custody battles can become emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. Each hearing carries consequences. Each legal filing reopens old wounds. Every decision has winners and losers, at least from the perspective of those emotionally invested. For some parents, frustration eventually subsides. For others, every unfavorable ruling deepens resentment. Detectives remained careful not to confuse conflict with criminal intent. Many separated families experience intense disagreements without violence. Still, investigators could not dismiss the possibility that months of unresolved hostility had created fertile ground for tragedy. The next step involved examining everyone directly connected to that conflict. Princess Perez immediately became one of the central figures in the investigation. Not because detectives assumed guilt, because she represented one of the closest existing connections between the victims and the ongoing custody dispute. Investigators carefully reviewed her recent communications, phone activity, known movements, witness accounts. Every detail was compared against the developing timeline of the murders. Attention soon expanded to Ramses Rex Morales. As Princess's current partner, he naturally entered investigators' focus as well. Again, detectives followed evidence rather than assumptions. Every homicide investigation demands discipline. Premature conclusions destroy cases. Facts must lead. The investigation soon produced information that investigators considered highly significant. According to evidence later outlined by prosecutors, both Princess Perez and Ramses Morales had been in the vicinity of the Grant Hill neighborhood around the time of the shooting. Exactly how investigators established that timeline has not been fully disclosed publicly, but law enforcement concluded that their movements deserved immediate scrutiny. Being present near a crime scene does not establish criminal responsibility. People travel through neighborhoods every day for countless innocent reasons. However, when proximity aligns with existing personal conflict, investigators naturally begin asking more detailed questions. Where exactly had they been? Who had seen them? How long had they remained there? Where did they go afterward? Those questions quickly became priorities. Detectives simultaneously worked another critical angle: digital evidence. Modern investigations increasingly rely upon technology to verify or contradict witness statements. Cell phones create invisible trails. They connect to towers. They record movement. They preserve communication histories. Vehicles equipped with navigation systems can reveal travel routes. Electronic payment records establish locations. Digital life often remembers details that human memory forgets. Specialists began comparing available digital information against witness interviews. Every confirmed point on the timeline strengthened investigators' understanding of the night's events. Meanwhile, officers assigned to neighborhood canvases continued speaking with residents. Some recalled hearing multiple gunshots. Others believed they had seen vehicles leaving the area shortly afterward. A few residents mentioned unfamiliar cars passing through the neighborhood earlier that evening. Individually, those observations remained inconclusive. Collectively, they helped investigators narrow possible sequences of events. One challenge repeatedly confronted the detectives. Nighttime changes perception. Darkness obscures details. Distances become difficult to estimate. Stress alters memory. Witnesses rarely agree perfectly. Investigators therefore searched for overlap rather than perfection. If independent witnesses described similar vehicles, similar directions of travel, or similar timeframes, confidence in those observations increased. By late morning, the investigation had expanded beyond San Diego city limits. Information suggested that individuals of interest might already be traveling. Law enforcement agencies began coordinating across jurisdictions. Communication became constant. Descriptions circulated rapidly. Investigators understood another uncomfortable reality. Southern California's proximity to the international border introduces unique investigative challenges. A person can travel from central San Diego to the Mexican border in less than an hour under favorable traffic conditions. If suspects crossed into another country, the investigation would immediately become more complicated. International cooperation remains effective in many cases, but every additional jurisdiction introduces legal procedures, coordination requirements, and valuable delays. Time therefore became the detectives' greatest concern. Every confirmed sighting mattered. Every surveillance image mattered. Every license plate report mattered. The investigation evolved into both a homicide inquiry and a race against the clock. While detectives pursued those leads, another team continued examining the victim's personal relationships in extraordinary detail. Family members described ongoing emotional strain surrounding custody issues. Friends discussed the complexities of blended families. Investigators reviewed prior police contacts, if any existed, involving interpersonal disputes. None of these facts independently established guilt. Rather, they helped investigators understand the emotional environment surrounding everyone involved. Violence rarely emerges from emotional emptiness. It usually develops within existing relationships. Understanding those relationships became essential. One particularly difficult aspect of the investigation involved separating fact from rumor. High-profile homicides generate speculation almost immediately. Social media users invent theories. Neighbors repeat conversations heard secondhand. Anonymous online accounts claim insider knowledge. Experienced detectives largely ignore such noise unless independently supported. Rumors waste time. Evidence solves cases. Throughout the day, media interest intensified dramatically. News stations broadcast aerial footage of Grant Hill. Reporters gathered outside police headquarters hoping for updates. Community members wanted reassurance. Parents worried whether someone capable of such violence remained free. Law enforcement remained cautious. Premature disclosure risks compromising witness testimony and investigative strategy. Every public statement required careful consideration. Behind the scenes, however, the investigation was moving remarkably quickly. The cooperation between multiple agencies allowed information to travel faster than in previous generations. Databases were searched. Records were shared electronically. Field investigators updated detectives in real time. The case no longer belonged solely to one neighborhood. It had become a regional effort. Then, during the afternoon, a development dramatically altered the course of the investigation. Federal authorities operating near the San Isidro port of entry became aware of two individuals whose movements aligned with information already circulating among investigators. The San Isidro crossing is one of the busiest land border crossings in the world. Every day, enormous numbers of travelers pass between the United States and Mexico. Within that constant flow of people and vehicles, identifying individuals connected to a homicide requires both efficient communication and extraordinary coordination. According to investigators, approximately 10 hours after the murders in Grant Hill, Ramses Morales and Princess Perez came to the attention of United States border authorities. Their presence immediately raised concern. Investigators believed they had traveled into Mexico after the shooting and were attempting to return to the United States. For detectives who had spent the morning fearing suspects might disappear, the news represented an unexpected opportunity. Instead of launching a prolonged manhunt, law enforcement suddenly had the chance to speak with two people already central to the investigation. Border personnel detained the pair while investigators coordinated their response. Every homicide detective understands that the hours immediately following an arrest are among the most important in an entire case. Memories remain fresh. Travel routes can still be verified. Physical evidence may still exist. Clothing, vehicles, electronic devices, all potentially become valuable sources of information if preserved quickly. As word spread through the investigative team, the atmosphere shifted again. The search phase was ending. The evidence phase was entering an entirely new chapter. Detectives now faced the challenge of determining whether the information they had gathered throughout the day would withstand direct scrutiny when confronted with the people they believed might know exactly what had happened on that quiet residential street. Yet arrests, or detentions, never conclude a homicide investigation. If anything, they begin its most demanding stage. Because suspicion is not proof. Presence is not guilt. Investigators would now have to establish, through evidence rather than assumption, exactly what role each individual had played during the final moments of Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin. The answers would eventually shape criminal charges carrying the possibility of the harshest penalties available under California law. But before prosecutors could stand before a jury, detectives first had to answer a question far more difficult than locating suspects. They had to determine whether the evidence told one consistent story, or several competing ones. The investigation had moved with remarkable speed. Less than half a day earlier, detectives had stood beneath flashing patrol lights in Grant Hill, carefully documenting two bodies lying in the middle of a quiet residential street. Now, before the first day of the investigation had even ended, they found themselves preparing for a completely different phase of the case. Finding people was only the beginning. Proving what they had done would be far more difficult. News that Ramses, Rex, Morales, and Princess Perez had been detained near the San Isidro port of entry spread quickly through the investigative team. Detectives, who had spent the morning reconstructing timelines, suddenly shifted their attention toward interviews, forensic examinations, and the preservation of every possible piece of evidence connected to the pair. Time remained critical. Whenever investigators identify potential suspects shortly after a violent crime, they move quickly to secure anything that may disappear with time. Clothing can be washed. Electronic devices can be reset. Vehicles can be cleaned. Memories become less reliable with every passing hour. The first objective was simple. Preserve everything. Investigators carefully documented every item associated with the two individuals. Personal belongings. Cell phones. Vehicles connected to their movements. Any evidence that might later help establish where they had traveled, who they had contacted, and what had happened during the hours surrounding the murders. Modern homicide investigations rarely depend upon a single dramatic discovery. Instead, they are built from dozens, sometimes hundreds, of small facts that gradually reinforce one another. A surveillance image here. A timestamp there. A phone record. A witness statement. DNA. Ballistics. Location data. Individually, each piece may appear insignificant. Together, they form a narrative capable of surviving the intense scrutiny of a courtroom. Detectives also began comparing the movements of Morales and Perez against the developing timeline of Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin's final hours. According to investigators, both individuals had been in the area surrounding Grant Hill around the time of the shooting. That conclusion did not emerge from a single source. Rather, it resulted from the combination of investigative work completed during the first day. Witness information. Digital evidence. Travel patterns. Each element strengthened the overall picture. Still, experienced detectives remained cautious. One of the greatest dangers in any homicide investigation is confirmation bias. Once investigators begin believing they have identified the correct suspects, every new piece of information can appear to support that conclusion. Professional investigators therefore force themselves to ask uncomfortable questions. Could someone else have committed the crime? Does the evidence contradict our theory? What facts remain unexplained? Those questions are not signs of weakness. They are essential safeguards against wrongful conclusions. Throughout the afternoon, forensic specialists continued processing evidence collected from the crime scene. Ballistics experts examined the recovered shell casings under high magnification. Every firearm leaves microscopic markings on the cartridge cases it ejects. These markings function almost like fingerprints. If investigators eventually recover the weapon believed to have been used, forensic comparison may determine whether those casings were fired from that specific firearm. Such examinations require patience. Microscopes replace intuition. Science replaces speculation. Elsewhere, digital forensic examiners began extracting information from electronic devices lawfully obtained during the investigation. Smartphones have become silent witnesses to modern life. They record calls, messages, photographs, locations, search histories. Sometimes they reveal exactly where a person traveled. Sometimes they contradict statements made during interviews. Sometimes they establish entirely new investigative leads that no one previously considered. Every device underwent careful examination, according to strict forensic procedures. Protecting the integrity of digital evidence is just as important as protecting physical evidence. One improperly handled phone can jeopardize months of investigative work. Meanwhile, homicide detectives conducted interviews. Exactly what was said during those conversations has not been publicly released in full, and investigators have understandably withheld many details while legal proceedings continue. What is publicly known is that detectives gathered sufficient evidence to support significant criminal charges. That decision did not arise from instinct. It resulted from the cumulative weight of the investigation. The crime scene, witness accounts, relationship history, digital evidence, travel activity following the shooting. Each category contributed to the broader picture. Another aspect of the investigation attracted particular attention: the alleged trip involving Mexico. According to authorities, Morales and Perez traveled into Mexico following the shooting before later attempting to re-enter the United States through the San Isidro port of entry. Investigators viewed those movements as highly significant. In criminal investigations, post-crime behavior often becomes an important subject of examination. Leaving an area after a crime is not automatically evidence of guilt. People travel for countless legitimate reasons every day. However, when travel occurs immediately following a homicide involving individuals already connected to the victims, investigators naturally examine those movements with extraordinary care. Why did they travel? When exactly did they cross? Who accompanied them? How long did they remain away? Every answer became another piece of the timeline. As detectives organized their findings, prosecutors began evaluating possible criminal charges. Charging decisions require more than suspicion. Prosecutors must believe sufficient admissible evidence exists to prove allegations beyond a reasonable doubt. That standard governs every criminal prosecution. It protects both victims seeking justice and defendants presumed innocent until proven guilty. After reviewing the available evidence, prosecutors concluded that formal charges were appropriate. Ramses Morales faced 2 counts of murder relating to the deaths of Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin. He also faced 3 counts connected to child endangerment, because 3 young children had been present only a short distance from the deadly violence. Those additional allegations reflected one of the most heartbreaking realities of the crime. Although the children survived physically unharmed, prosecutors argued they had nevertheless been placed in extraordinary danger. Princess Perez faced separate allegations. According to prosecutors, she assisted Morales after the shooting, including helping him leave the scene and travel toward Mexico. Authorities therefore charged her in connection with her alleged actions following the killings. As with every criminal case, these allegations represent the prosecution's position and remain subject to judicial determination. Formal charges are accusations, not convictions. The distinction is fundamental to the justice system. For the families of Ruben and Evelyn, however, the announcement of arrests and charges represented the first indication that answers might eventually emerge. Relatives had spent the first day consumed by grief. Now grief merged with another powerful emotion. Hope. Not hope that their loved ones could return. That was impossible. Hope that whoever bore legal responsibility would one day face justice inside a courtroom rather than remain an unanswered mystery. Children, meanwhile, remained at the center of everyone's thoughts. 3 toddlers had survived. 9 children across the blended family had lost parents. No criminal prosecution, regardless of outcome, could restore what those children had lost. Justice can punish. Justice cannot rewind time. As investigators prepared reports summarizing the extraordinary first day of the case, many reflected privately upon how rapidly events had unfolded. Some homicide investigations remain unsolved for decades. Others require months before investigators identify meaningful suspects. Here, the combination of physical evidence, relationship history, rapid interagency cooperation, and swift action near the international border had dramatically accelerated the investigation. Yet experienced detectives understood something equally important. Fast investigations still require careful investigations. Every report would eventually be examined by defense attorneys. Every investigative decision would be questioned. Every piece of evidence would be scrutinized before a judge, and potentially, a jury. The burden remained on the prosecution to establish guilt through evidence rather than assumption. As evening approached on January 19th, the Grant Hill neighborhood slowly returned to its familiar appearance. Crime scene tape came down. Police vehicles gradually departed. Residents cautiously resumed ordinary routines. Children played in nearby yards once again. Cars drove along streets that only hours earlier had been sealed off as an active homicide scene. Yet nothing truly felt ordinary anymore. Every neighbor knew exactly where the shooting had occurred. Every family remembered the flashing lights. Every parent imagined the 3 children waiting silently inside that nearby vehicle. Physical evidence had been collected. Suspects had been identified. Charges had been filed. But the deepest question remained unanswered. How had months of relationship conflict evolved into an act of violence that destroyed 2 lives and forever altered the futures of 9 children? That answer would not emerge from the crime scene alone. It would instead become the central issue argued in court, where prosecutors and defense attorneys would present sharply different interpretations of the same tragic events. Only there would the evidence face its greatest test. The transition from an active homicide investigation to a courtroom prosecution is often slower than the public expects. Television dramas compress months of legal preparation into a single dramatic episode. Reality is very different. After the arrests, the investigation into the deaths of Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin did not simply end. In many ways, it entered its most demanding stage. Detectives continued refining timelines. Forensic specialists completed laboratory examinations. Prosecutors reviewed thousands of pages of reports, photographs, interview summaries, digital records, and physical evidence. Every conclusion had to withstand legal scrutiny. Every procedural step had to comply with constitutional protections. The stakes could not have been higher. 2 people were dead. 3 small children had been present only a short distance from the violence. 9 children across the blended family were now growing up without parents they had expected to see again the following morning. At the center of the legal proceedings stood 2 defendants. Ramses Rex Morales, Princess Perez. The prosecution's theory was clear. According to prosecutors, the shootings were not random. They argued that the murders emerged from long-standing interpersonal conflict involving custody disputes, deteriorating relationships, jealousy, and unresolved resentment that had accumulated over time. Those allegations formed the foundation of the criminal case. Morales was charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin. In addition, prosecutors filed 3 counts related to child endangerment, arguing that the presence of the 3 young children near the shooting exposed them to extraordinary danger despite the fact that they survived physically unharmed. The prosecution also alleged special circumstances connected to the murders. Under California law, certain aggravating circumstances can significantly affect potential punishment if they are ultimately proven in court. Among the circumstances reportedly under consideration were allegations involving multiple victims and the possibility that one victim had been killed to eliminate a witness. These allegations remain matters for judicial determination and require proof under the applicable legal standards. Princess Perez faced different accusations. According to prosecutors, she assisted Morales after the shootings by helping him leave the area and travel toward Mexico before the pair later returned to the United States. Based on those allegations, prosecutors charged her in connection with her alleged conduct following the killings. As required under the American justice system, both defendants were presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That presumption is not a technicality. It is one of the fundamental principles of criminal law. Public suspicion cannot replace admissible evidence. Emotional reactions cannot replace proof. Every defendant, regardless of the severity of the allegations, is entitled to a fair trial. When Morales appeared before the court, he entered a plea of not guilty. Princess Perez likewise entered a plea of not guilty to the charges brought against her. Those 2 words immediately shaped the future of the case. Not guilty. The plea did not establish innocence. Neither did it challenge the tragedy itself. Instead, it required prosecutors to prove every essential element of the alleged offenses through evidence presented before the court. The burden remained entirely with the state. For the victims' families, the legal process became another difficult chapter in an already unimaginable tragedy. Every court appearance reopened emotional wounds. Each hearing required relatives to revisit the circumstances surrounding Ruben and Evelyn's deaths. Families often describe homicide prosecutions as a second form of grief. The funeral marks the end of one painful chapter. The courtroom begins another. Months can pass between hearings. Continuances delay proceedings. Evidence requires additional analysis. Attorneys file motions. Judges rule on procedural questions. The search for justice demands patience from people already carrying enormous emotional burdens. During pretrial proceedings, prosecutors continued organizing the evidence collected during the investigation. The crime scene. Witness testimony. Forensic examinations. Digital records. Travel information. Relationship history. Each category would eventually contribute to the broader narrative presented in court. The prosecution's responsibility extended beyond proving that Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin had been killed. That fact was never in dispute. Instead, prosecutors had to establish who bore criminal responsibility and demonstrate how the available evidence supported that conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt. Defense attorneys, meanwhile, prepared to challenge that narrative. The adversarial system functions precisely because both sides examine the evidence critically. Defense counsel may question investigative methods, challenge witness reliability, examine forensic procedures, contest legal interpretations. Such challenges are not obstacles to justice. They are essential safeguards designed to ensure that convictions rest upon reliable evidence rather than assumption. Public attention remained focused on one heartbreaking detail throughout the proceedings. The 3 children. Although they were far too young to testify or understand the legal complexities unfolding around them, they remained central to the emotional impact of the case. Their presence near the shooting influenced not only public perception, but also the additional child endangerment allegations filed by prosecutors. Many people struggled to comprehend how violence could occur so close to children still secured inside their safety seats. That image became one of the defining symbols of the tragedy. Beyond the courtroom, the wider family faced challenges impossible to solve through legal proceedings alone. 9 children now carried the consequences of a single night. Some had lost fathers. Others had lost mothers. Some had lost both central figures in their daily lives. Relatives assumed new responsibilities. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, extended family members. They stepped forward not because they had planned to, but because children suddenly depended upon them. No verdict, regardless of outcome, could restore the ordinary family life that had disappeared. As legal proceedings continued, media coverage remained substantial. Reporters summarized hearings. Television stations revisited the facts of the investigation. Community members followed developments with understandable interest. The case had captured public attention because it reflected fears many families quietly carry. Conflict after separation. Custody disputes. New relationships. Children caught between adults. Most families navigate these difficulties without violence. This case appeared to represent the devastating exception. Investigators themselves remained involved long after the arrests. Detectives frequently assist prosecutors throughout complex homicide prosecutions. They clarify investigative decisions, review evidence, prepare witnesses, respond to new defense motions. A homicide investigation rarely concludes with an arrest. It often continues until the final resolution of the case. At the time reflected by the publicly available information, the criminal proceedings remained ongoing. No final verdict had yet been reached. No sentence had yet been imposed. The defendants remained in custody while the judicial process continued. That distinction remains important. The legal system moves deliberately because the consequences are profound. If convictions ultimately occur, they must rest upon evidence capable of withstanding appellate review as well as public scrutiny. If acquittals occur, they must likewise emerge from the same constitutional process. Justice demands patience precisely because it demands accuracy. For the families of Ruben Chavez and Evelyn Virgin, however, the calendar offered little comfort. Birthdays continued arriving. Children continued growing. Family gatherings continued with empty places at the table. Time moved forward even while the legal process remained unfinished. The courtroom could determine criminal responsibility. It could not erase absence. It could not return parents to children who would spend the rest of their lives learning about them through photographs, family stories, and memories preserved by those who loved them. That reality extends beyond this single case. Every homicide leaves behind two parallel stories. One unfolds inside courtrooms through legal arguments, evidence, and judicial decisions. The other unfolds quietly inside homes where children ask questions, relatives preserve fading memories, and families struggle to rebuild lives permanently divided into before and after. The first story eventually reaches a legal conclusion. The second rarely does.